She lost everything in a single phone call. Her savings, her trust, and her future. But the real shock didn't come from the scam. It came from what she uncovered afterward. Beneath her late mother's quiet, forgotten orchard. A secret buried so deep. It was never meant to see daylight again. And when she finally opened it, her entire life turned into something she no longer recognized. The phone rang just after noon, when Margaret was sitting near the kitchen window, watching the slow movement of dust in the sunlight. It was one of those quiet days where nothing felt urgent, nothing felt dangerous, and nothing suggested that life could still take something away from her. She had grown used to silence since her husband passed away. The house didn't echo anymore. It simply waited. She looked at the unknown number on the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello." There was a short pause, then a calm, professional voice responded. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Margaret. This is Daniel Carter from the National Banking Security Department." The name sounded official enough. The tone sounded trained, careful, and reassuring, not rushed, not suspicious. Exactly the kind of voice that knew how to sound believable. "We've detected unusual activity linked to your bank account," the man continued. "Several unauthorized attempts have been made in the last 24 hours. We believe someone may be trying to access your funds." Margaret straightened slightly in her chair. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "My account? That can't be right. I haven't done anything unusual." "That's exactly why we are calling you, ma'am," the voice replied smoothly. "These cases often happen without the account holder's knowledge. Someone may already have your details. But don't worry, we are here to secure everything before any damage is done." There was something comforting in the way he said, "Don't worry." It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't demanding. It felt like help arriving just in time. Margaret glanced toward the small wooden cabinet where she kept her passbook and documents. She hadn't touched them in weeks, maybe longer. She trusted her bank. She trusted the system. She had always believed that money, once safely placed, stayed safe. "What do I need to do?" she asked quietly. The man paused, as if he was carefully choosing the safest instructions. "We will temporarily move your funds into a secure protection account. This is standard procedure in fraud prevention cases. Once the threat is eliminated, everything will be restored automatically." "Temporarily," she repeated. "Yes, just for security purposes. It will only take a few steps. I will guide you personally." There was a softness in his voice that made her feel like she wasn't alone in this. Like someone responsible was finally taking care of things she didn't understand. Margaret hesitated, but only for a moment longer than comfort allowed. She had never been good with digital banking. She always preferred physical visits, paper records, human conversations. But the world had changed, and she had slowly started to feel like a visitor in it. "If I don't do this, will I lose my money?" she asked. The pause that followed was perfectly timed. "I'm afraid there is a high risk, ma'am. We are trying to prevent that from happening." That was enough. Her chest tightened slightly, not from panic but from responsibility, the feeling that she had to act or regret it later. "All right," she said, "tell me what to do." Step by step, the man guided her. He asked her to confirm her name, then her bank name, then partial details of her account. Everything sounded reasonable, even cautious. He never asked for anything unusual at once, only small confirmations, like pieces of a puzzle being gently assembled. "You will now receive a verification code," he said. "Please read it back to me so I can secure your account." Her phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from the bank appeared on screen. She read it carefully, a 6-digit number. She read it out loud. "Perfect," the voice said warmly. "We are almost done." There was a brief sound of typing on the other end. Fast, confident, like someone working in a controlled environment. "You are doing very well, Mrs. Margaret. Most people panic during these situations. She felt oddly reassured by that. "I just want to be safe," she said. "And you will be," he replied. "Now, for final confirmation, we need to transfer the remaining balance into your secure holding account. After this, your funds will be fully protected." She stood up slowly and walked toward the cabinet, retrieving her passbook. Her hands were slightly unsteady now, though she didn't fully notice it. She was focused on doing things correctly, not quickly. "How long will this take?" she asked. "Only a few minutes." She sat back down, opened her account app as instructed, and followed the steps he gave her. Each instruction felt simple on its own. Enter this. Confirm that. Approve transfer. The amounts on the screen were large, larger than she liked to see moving at once. But the man's voice stayed steady, almost soothing, as if reminding her that everything was under control. "You are protecting your lifetime savings right now," he said. "This is the most important step." That sentence settled inside her like a weight. Lifetime savings. Everything she and her late husband had built together. Decades of careful living, careful spending, careful saving. She pressed confirm. A final notification appeared on her screen. "Processing." The man exhaled softly on the phone. "Excellent work, ma'am. The transfer is in progress. Once completed, your account will be fully secured." Margaret leaned back in her chair, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. It was done. Whatever danger had been looming over her money was now being handled by professionals. "You've been very helpful," she said sincerely. "It is our duty," he replied. "One last thing, Mrs. Margaret. Please do not share this process with anyone. Fraud cases are sensitive. Even bank employees may not be fully informed during ongoing investigations." That sounded serious enough for her to nod, even though he couldn't see it. "Of course," she said. There was a slight pause again, just long enough to feel natural. "Thank you for your cooperation," the voice added. "You will receive confirmation shortly. Have a safe day." The call ended. For a moment, Margaret just sat there holding the phone, staring at the quiet kitchen around her. The sunlight had shifted slightly across the floor. The dust continued to float, unchanged by what had just happened. She waited for the confirmation message. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She opened her banking app again. The balance was gone. Not reduced. Not pending. Gone. Her fingers froze on the screen as she refreshed it again. Once, twice, a third time. Still nothing. A cold sensation began spreading slowly through her chest. Not sudden, not explosive, but steady and undeniable, like water rising in a sinking room. She tried calling the number back. It no longer existed. The screen showed invalid number. She stood up slowly, the chair scraping lightly behind her. The house suddenly felt louder than before. Every small sound seemed sharper. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even her own breathing. Her hands trembled as she walked to the cabinet again, pulling out every document she had. Account details, bank statements, anything that could explain what had happened. Nothing made sense. The money wasn't pending anywhere. It wasn't frozen. It wasn't waiting. It was simply inaccessible, as if it had never been there at all. She sat back down, staring at the empty screen, trying to understand how a voice she had never seen could step into her life so easily, take something so large, and leave so little trace behind. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing against the glass window gently, as if nothing had changed at all. Margaret didn't sleep that night. Not properly. Not the kind of sleep that brings rest or relief. She sat in the dim light of her small living room, staring at the same phone that had once felt ordinary but now seemed like a weapon used against her. Every few minutes, she checked her bank account again, hoping that something would change, hoping that maybe it had been a mistake, some technical delay, some misunderstanding that would fix itself if she just waited long enough. But the screen never changed. The numbers never returned. The silence from the other side of her financial life remained complete, as if a door had been sealed shut forever without explanation. By morning, she already knew she couldn't stay in that house much longer. It wasn't just the loss of money that weighed on her. It was the feeling of being watched by emptiness. As if the walls themselves now knew she had been taken advantage of and could do nothing about it. The neighborhood outside still looked the same. Children walked to school. Neighbors watered plants. Life continued in its usual rhythm, untouched by what had happened inside her small kitchen the day before, and that contrast made everything feel even worse, as if her pain had been placed behind an invisible glass wall that no one else could see. She tried calling the bank again, but every number led her to automated messages that repeated the same polite sentences without offering any real answers. She visited a local branch in person, carrying her documents tightly in a worn folder, but the staff there gave her confused looks that slowly turned into concern, then into polite distance, as if her situation belonged to a system they could not access or understand. One young clerk told her there was no record of the secure transfer service she described, and when she insisted, they suggested she report it to the fraud department, handing her a leaflet that felt lighter than the weight in her chest. It was on her way back from the bank that the reality began to settle in more deeply, not all at once but in pieces. First came disbelief, then anger, then a slow, sinking realization that there was no one to immediately fix this for her. The money was gone, not misplaced, not frozen, gone, and with it went something else she hadn't fully recognized until that moment, a sense of safety she had carried quietly for years, the belief that careful living could protect her from chaos. She stood at a bus stop for a long time without realizing the bus had already come and gone twice. People around her moved normally, checking phones, talking, laughing, planning their days. She felt slightly separated from them, like someone who had stepped out of time. Her hands kept trembling, not dramatically, but in small, persistent movements that she couldn't control. At some point, she realized she was still holding the empty folder from the bank, and she folded it slowly as if trying to hide the fact that it no longer mattered. Returning home that evening felt different. The house she had lived in for years no longer felt like protection. It felt like space she could no longer afford, not just financially, but emotionally. Every object inside seemed to carry a reminder of stability she no longer had. The framed photograph of her late husband on the shelf suddenly felt heavier to look at, as if even memories were questioning her ability to take care of things. She sat in silence for a long time, not crying yet, just existing in the uncomfortable space between shock and acceptance, where thoughts don't form properly and time feels slightly disconnected. It was during that silence that she began thinking about leaving. Not permanently, not at first, but just temporarily, somewhere quieter, somewhere she wouldn't have to answer questions from neighbors or face the repeated suggestion that she should contact authorities, as if she hadn't already tried everything she knew. The idea of going somewhere familiar but distant started forming slowly in her mind, like a path appearing in fog. Her late mother's orchard came to her first as a memory rather than a plan. It had been years since she last visited it. After her mother passed away, the orchard had been left mostly untouched, too far from the city to maintain easily, too old to be profitable, too emotionally tied to memories that she and her siblings had gradually stopped visiting. But in her mind, it still existed as something stable, something untouched by modern problems, something that belonged to a time when life felt slower and more understandable. She remembered running between the apple trees as a child, her mother calling her name from the wooden house at the edge of the land, the smell of soil after rain, the sound of wind passing through branches like quiet conversation. Back then, the orchard had felt endless, not in size but in possibility. It had been a place where nothing bad had ever happened, or at least nothing that felt permanent. The next morning, she packed a small bag without fully planning it. A few clothes, some documents, a photograph of her husband, and the old key her mother had once kept on a chain around her neck during her final years. She wasn't even sure why she took it, only that it felt important in a way she couldn't explain. The bus ride to the countryside took hours, and with every passing mile, the noise of the city slowly faded into open fields and long stretches of road that made her feel both smaller and strangely lighter. When she finally arrived, the air felt different. Cleaner, slower, almost suspended. The orchard was located a short walk from the nearest stop, and as she approached it, she noticed how much had changed and how much had not. The gate was still there, though rusted. The fence still stood, though leaning in places. The trees were still alive but less carefully maintained, their branches growing freely without the shaping hands of regular care. She paused at the entrance for a long moment before stepping inside. The ground beneath her feet felt softer than she remembered, covered in layers of fallen leaves and time. The house at the far end of the orchard looked smaller now, as if age had compressed it into memory. Paint peeled from the walls. Windows reflected more sky than interior light. She walked slowly through the rows of trees, touching trunks as she passed them, not speaking, not thinking clearly, just letting herself be present in a place that did not demand explanation. For the first time since the scam, her breathing slowed slightly, not because her problems were gone, but because they were no longer shouting directly at her. She didn't know yet that this place, which she had come to for silence and recovery, would soon become something else entirely, something that would connect her loss to a history she had never fully understood, something buried not just in memory, but beneath the very ground she was now standing on. The orchard had always carried a strange kind of silence, but now it felt heavier, almost intentional, as if the place was waiting for her to notice something she had missed all her life. Margaret moved slowly between the trees, her hand occasionally brushing against rough bark, feeling the familiar texture that once meant comfort but now felt unfamiliar in its stillness. The scam, the loss, the confusion of the past days, all of it had pushed her into a state where even memories felt uncertain. She wasn't sure if she had come here to heal or simply to disappear into something quieter than her pain. The old house at the edge of the orchard creaked softly when the wind passed through it. She stepped inside carefully, each floorboard responding with a tired sound, as if recognizing her but not fully remembering her presence. Dust had settled over everything in uneven layers. Furniture stood where it had always been, but time had softened its edges. She moved through the room slowly, not searching for anything specific at first, just letting her eyes adjust to the familiar unfamiliarity of the space. In her mother's bedroom, the air felt different. Heavier, more contained, like the room had preserved something that didn't belong to the present. Margaret stood near the old wooden dresser, running her fingers lightly across its surface. It was here that her mother had spent her final years, quietly maintaining routines that seemed small at the time but now felt meaningful in ways Margaret was only beginning to understand. She opened the top drawer without expectation. Inside were folded fabrics, old receipts, a few handwritten notes, and items that seemed too ordinary to carry importance. She was about to close it when her attention caught on something tucked beneath a stack of cloth. She hesitated, then reached in carefully, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in faded fabric. It was tied loosely with a thin string, worn and brittle from age. Unwrapping it revealed a small metal key. It wasn't large or decorative. It was simple, old, and slightly rusted at the edges, but something about it made her pause longer than she expected. It didn't belong to anything visible in the room. She turned it in her fingers, noticing faint scratches along its surface, as if it had been used often at some point and then deliberately hidden away. Her eyes fell on a piece of paper folded beneath the cloth. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, slightly shaky but still deliberate. She unfolded it slowly, as if afraid it might break apart in her hands. The message was short, almost unsettling in its simplicity. For when the truth is needed. Margaret read it once, then again, trying to understand what it meant. Her mother had never spoken of secrets. She had always been practical, quiet, focused on routine and survival. There was nothing in her memory that suggested hidden messages or locked truths. Yet here it was, a key paired with a sentence that felt heavier than it should have been. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, turning the key over and over. The orchard outside remained still, but inside her mind, something was beginning to shift. She thought about the scam again, about how easily trust had been used against her, about how little control she had over systems she once believed were secure. Now, sitting in her mother's room, holding something unknown, she felt that same uncertainty returning, but in a different form. Eventually, she stood up and walked outside, the key still in her hand. The afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows between the trees. She moved without direction at first, letting instinct guide her rather than thought. The orchard had not changed in structure, but it felt different now that she was looking at it with questions instead of memories. She passed rows of apple trees, some older than others, their branches twisting in slow, natural patterns shaped by years of neglect. Near the center of the orchard, there was a section she rarely remembered visiting as a child. It had always been overgrown, slightly uneven, avoided more out of habit than instruction. As she approached it now, she noticed something subtle in the ground. Not obvious at first, but enough to slow her steps. The soil in one area looked slightly disturbed, less compact than the rest. Grass grew unevenly there, as if something beneath it had once shifted and never fully settled again. She stopped, staring at the spot without understanding why her attention had locked onto it so strongly. The wind moved through the trees, but it felt distant, like background noise rather than part of her immediate surroundings. She knelt slowly, brushing away leaves and loose soil with her hand. The ground felt cooler here, firmer in some places, softer in others. It didn't take long before she noticed a faint outline beneath the surface, something rectangular, hidden just below the layer of earth and time. Her heart began to beat differently, not fast yet, but deeper, more conscious. She cleared more soil carefully, revealing a faint metal edge. Rusted. A seam. Something embedded beneath the orchard floor that didn't belong naturally to the land. Her fingers hesitated before continuing, as if her body was trying to slow her down even though her curiosity was already moving forward. Within minutes, the shape became clearer. A small hatch, partially concealed by dirt and roots, almost perfectly blended into the ground. It looked old, far older than anything above it. The metal was weathered but still intact. There was no visible handle, only a small keyhole near one corner. Margaret looked down at the key in her hand again. For a moment she didn't move. The realization didn't arrive suddenly. It formed slowly, like a thought that didn't want to be believed. Her mother's note, the key, the hidden structure beneath the orchard. None of it felt accidental anymore. It felt connected in a way she couldn't yet fully understand. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the key toward the lock. She hesitated again, glancing around the orchard as if expecting someone to stop her or explain what she was about to do. But there was no one. Only trees, only wind, only the quiet pressure of something waiting. When the key finally slid into the lock, it fit perfectly, as though it had always belonged there. She turned it slowly. A deep metallic click echoed through the ground beneath her, followed by a long, low creak that seemed to come from deep below the surface rather than the hatch itself. The sound was heavy, deliberate, like something waking after a long sleep. The edge of the hatch shifted slightly. A thin line of darkness appeared beneath it. Cold air rose from the opening, carrying a scent that didn't belong to the orchard above. Margaret leaned back slightly, staring at the gap that had just formed in the earth, realizing that what she had uncovered was not just a hidden object, but something that had been waiting for her specifically, tied not only to her mother's past, but to something far larger than she had ever imagined the moment Margaret lifted the hatch fully. The world above her seemed to fade in importance. The orchard, the trees, the wind moving through branches, All of it remained, but it no longer felt like the center of anything. Cold air rose from beneath the ground in slow waves, carrying a strange metallic scent mixed with damp earth and something older, something that felt sealed away for a long time. She hesitated for only a second before lowering herself down the narrow steps, each one carved into stone that had clearly not been touched in years. The deeper she went, the more the sound of the outside world disappeared. No birds, no wind, just the faint echo of her own breathing and the soft scrape of her shoes against the stone steps. The walls around her were uneven, aged, but intentionally built. This was not a natural formation. It was constructed, hidden, and forgotten on purpose. At the bottom, a small chamber opened up, lit only by the weak beam of her phone flashlight. What she saw made her pause so completely that her body forgot how to move for a moment. The room was filled with stacked wooden crates, metal boxes, and shelves lined with files. Not random storage, but organized, deliberate storage. Everything had been placed with care, as if someone had expected it to be found one day, just not easily. She stepped forward slowly, her light sweeping across labels and markings. Some of the boxes were sealed with old government-style stamps. Others had handwritten tags, dates, and coded references she didn't understand. The air felt still, untouched, almost preserved, as if the room had been sealed and left undisturbed for decades. Her fingers moved cautiously across one of the crates, then another, until she found a stack of folders tied together with faded string. She pulled them out carefully, dust rising into the air as if even the movement itself disturbed something fragile. The first folder she opened contained names, pages and pages of names, each accompanied by numbers, bank references, and coded notes. None of it made sense at first. But then she noticed patterns. Certain names repeated across different pages, certain accounts linked together, certain dates aligned in ways that suggested coordination, not coincidence. Her chest tightened slightly as she turned page after page, realizing she wasn't looking at random paperwork. She was looking at a system. A system of transactions. A system of transfers. A system that seemed to involve money moving in and out of accounts that didn't belong to the people listed. Her breath slowed as she opened another folder, this one thicker, heavier. Inside were printed reports, internal memos, and scanned documents marked with institutional headers. One phrase appeared repeatedly across multiple pages, highlighted in faded ink. Asset Redistribution Protocol. She didn't understand the full meaning yet, but something about it made her stomach feel uneasy. She kept reading, moving deeper into the stack until she found a document that looked different from the others. It was newer, or at least less aged. The paper was cleaner, the formatting more recent. At the top of the page, in bold letters, were words that made her freeze. TRMNATD, Account Recovery Program. Her eyes scanned the contents faster now, urgency replacing confusion. The document described a process involving dormant accounts belonging primarily to elderly individuals, accounts that were flagged as inactive or unmonitored. According to the text, these funds were being systematically transferred under the guise of security measures, fraud prevention protocols, and administrative consolidation. Margaret's hands began to shake slightly as she read further. The language was carefully written, clinical, detached. It described the process as protective intervention, risk mitigation, and temporary securing of assets. But beneath the formal wording, the meaning was clear enough for her to feel it without needing further explanation. The system was not protecting people. It was removing their access and redistributing their money. She flipped to another page, then another, each one confirming the same structure. A network of accounts, a chain of transfers, a pattern of controlled extraction disguised as financial security. Then she saw something that made her stop completely. A list of targeted individuals. Names, ages, account statuses. Her name was there. Not as a victim in a general sense, but as a scheduled entry. Alongside it was a date, the same period when she had received the phone call, the same moment her life had been drained away. Her mind struggled to process it at first. It felt too precise, too coordinated. The scam hadn't been random. It hadn't been a stranger stumbling upon her number. It had been selected, marked, initiated. Her breathing grew shallow as she turned the page slowly, revealing notes attached to her entry, observations about her account activity, her transaction history, even references to her living situation. Single account holder, limited external monitoring, high vulnerability classification. The words felt invasive, almost personal, as if someone had studied her life not as a person, but as a system entry waiting to be processed. She stepped back slightly, gripping the edge of a crate for support. The room suddenly felt smaller, more enclosed, as if the walls were closing in with the weight of what she was reading. Her mother's orchard had not just been land. It had been a cover, a hiding place, a deliberate choice. But why here? That question lingered in her mind as she continued searching through the materials. She found another section, older than the rest. Handwritten notes this time, her mother's handwriting. At first she thought it might be unrelated, but as she read, her understanding shifted again. Her mother had discovered it. Years ago. The same system. The same structure. The same hidden financial manipulation. But instead of exposing it immediately, she had documented it, tracked it, hidden it. There were references to meetings, warnings, and attempts to report it through official channels that were apparently dismissed or ignored. Then came entries that grew more urgent over time, describing pressure, surveillance, and subtle threats that were never openly stated but clearly felt. One line repeated in different forms across multiple notes. They will not stop unless it is buried. Margaret felt a cold realization forming in her chest. The orchard wasn't just a hiding place. It was a decision. A final attempt to preserve evidence in a location no one would think to search. And somehow, despite all that effort, the system had still reached her. Not by accident, but by design. She placed the documents down slowly, looking around the underground chamber again with a different understanding now. This wasn't just storage. It was evidence. Not passive history, but active exposure waiting to be discovered at the exact moment it was needed. And now that she had found it, the system above ground was no longer invisible. It had a name. It had structure. It had reach. And it knew she was here. Margaret didn't realize how long she had been standing in that underground chamber until her legs started to feel heavy, as if the weight of everything she had just discovered was physically pulling her down. The documents in her hands no longer felt like paper. They felt like evidence that had been waiting for a moment like this. A moment where someone who still remembered how to question things would finally open them again. But along with that realization came something colder, a sense that she was no longer just someone who had found a secret. She had become part of it. Above her, the orchard remained quiet, but it no longer felt safe in the way it once did. The silence had changed shape. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. Every creak of the trees, every shift of wind seemed to carry meaning now. She climbed back up slowly, holding the documents tightly against her chest, as if they could be taken away at any moment. When she reached the surface, the evening light had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows between the trees. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. She stood near the open hatch for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to decide what to do next. A part of her wanted to close it, walk away, pretend none of it had ever existed. That part of her was tired, overwhelmed, and afraid. But another part, quieter but stronger, understood something important. If she closed it now, it would not disappear. It would only remain hidden again, waiting for the next person to fall into the same trap she had just escaped from. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound. At first, it was subtle, like footsteps on uneven ground. She froze instinctively, listening carefully. The orchard was large enough that sound often traveled strangely, but this was different. These steps were deliberate, controlled, approaching. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning between the trees. For a brief moment she saw nothing. Then in the fading light she noticed movement near the edge of the orchard, a figure, then another. They were not rushing. They were observing, and they were moving closer. Her grip tightened around the documents. She understood immediately. She had been followed. The realization didn't come as panic at first, it came as clarity. The scam, the phone call, the instructions, the transfer of her money, all of it suddenly aligned into a pattern that no longer felt random. She had not simply been robbed. She had been guided. Guided toward this place, toward this discovery. And now that she had reached it, the system behind it had responded. She stepped backward slowly, moving closer to the open hatch, not because she intended to hide, but because instinct still sought distance between her and whatever was approaching. The figures between the trees stopped at a certain point, no longer hidden but not fully revealed either. They remained partially obscured by shadow and branches, as if waiting for her to react first. A voice called out, calm and controlled. "You weren't supposed to find that." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried an authority that made it feel closer than it actually was. Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the documents in her hands again, then back toward the figures. Something inside her had shifted completely now. Fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing present. There was something else growing alongside it, understanding. "I didn't find anything," she finally said, her voice steadying more than she expected. "It was already here." A pause followed. Then another voice, slightly different, answered. "Those records belong to systems that no longer exist." Margaret almost laughed at that, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "They exist," she replied quietly. "I'm holding them." The orchard felt still again. Even the wind seemed to slow. The figures did not move closer, but they did not leave either. It was as if they were deciding something. Margaret looked at the open hatch behind her. For a moment, she considered going back down, not to hide, but to protect what was inside. But something in her resisted that thought. The truth she had uncovered was not meant to stay underground. That much was clear now. One of the figures finally stepped forward slightly, just enough for her to see the outline of a person, not clearly, but enough to confirm that they were real and not imagination. "You don't understand what you've triggered," the voice said again, more controlled this time, less patient. Margaret tightened her hold on the documents. "I understand enough," she said. That was when something changed in her completely. Not suddenly, but decisively. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer dictated her movement. Instead, something older inside her surfaced. The part of her that had survived loneliness after her husband's death. The part that had survived the scam. The part that had already lost everything once and realized there was nothing left to be taken that couldn't be rebuilt in a different form. She stepped forward instead of backward. The figures did not expect that. She could sense it even from the distance. "I was alone when you took everything from me," she said, her voice carrying further now, clearer, stronger. "You chose the wrong person to forget." Silence followed again, but this time it was different, less controlled, more uncertain. Margaret walked slowly toward the house at the edge of the orchard, not running, not hiding, but moving with purpose. The documents remained in her hands, but they no longer felt like burden. They felt like proof of something that had to exist outside this place. Behind her, she heard movement, but she did not turn around. She no longer needed to see them to understand what was happening. The system that had operated in silence for so long had finally been exposed to someone who refused to treat silence as safety. Inside the house, she found an old radio, a relic her mother had kept but never used much. Her hands moved without hesitation now. She wasn't sure exactly what she was doing, only that she needed to make the information leave this place. Not stay buried, not remain controlled. She began writing notes, copying what she could from memory and documents, preparing to send it out in whatever way possible. Every second now felt connected to something larger than her own survival. It felt like a point of no return. Outside, the orchard remained unchanged, but its meaning had transformed completely. It was no longer just land. It was evidence, and evidence once revealed cannot return to silence in the same way again. By the time the first light of morning reached the trees, Margaret was no longer the same person who had arrived there days earlier. She was no longer only a victim of a scam. She was now someone standing at the center of a truth that refused to stay hidden. And somewhere beyond the orchard, the system that had once believed itself invisible had begun to understand something it had long forgotten. Silence is not the same as safety. And truth, once uncovered, does not wait for permission to spread. The moral of this story is simple but powerful. Sometimes loss is not the end, but the beginning of awareness. And when truth is buried for too long, even the most ordinary person can become the one who brings it back into the light, not because they are powerful, but because they refuse to stay silent when silence is exactly what injustice depends on. This story is a work of fiction created for storytelling and entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real events, places, or individuals is purely coincidental. The narrative is designed to explore emotional and dramatic themes, not to represent factual incidents.